During the House of Brainiac event, we saw Lex Luthor sacrifice his memories and his identity to stop Brainiac and save the Earth. But does the world need Lex Luthor? That's the question at the heart of the comic book that we're going to be discussing today, the Superman Lex Luthor Special, written by Joshua Williamson and illustrated by Eddie Barrows and Aber Ferreira. Let me know down in the comments what you guys thought of this one-shot issue. I'm Brennan for the New Wave Nerds. Subscribe down below for more nerd content and commentary. Now let's roll the intro. As always, we're going to begin with a short, non-spoiler review, and at the outset of this, I want to bring to light the fact that I am pretty biased here, and I'm aware of my biases. Lex Luthor is one of my favorite villains ever, and I would maybe even go so far as to say that he is one of the greatest villains of all time. I think the dichotomy between him and Superman, Lex Luthor and Clark Kent, the man of tomorrow versus the man of today, is supremely interesting to me. I love to see these two play off of each other, and watching the story arc of Lex Luthor evolve over the course of years is incredibly fun, and I think it almost always lends to good storytelling. Now, as it pertains to this comic, I will say that I did enjoy it. I liked it more than the last one-shot we took a look at, the Green Lantern Fractured Spectrum, and I liked it more than the Superwoman Special as well. I think this comic did a much better job about establishing the playing field and setting things up moving forward. And also, I think that the writing in and of itself in the comic is much better done than, like, for example, in the Superwoman Special. Now, I did like the Superwoman Special, but it's a very different type of story here. But that being said, there is obviously a couple complaints that I have for this specific comic book, and the complaint that I have, my biggest issue, is the same complaint that I levied against Green Lantern Fractured Spectrum. In both cases, I think that the comic books, the special, the one-shot issue, could have done with a little bit more, a few more pages, 48 or however many, just to really get the story across. Now, it is the same complaint, but it is ever so slightly different. In the case of Green Lantern, I had wished that we had spent a little bit more time establishing what had happened in the past and how it specifically relates to what's going on in this book. But in the Lex Luthor Special, I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of the in-depth analysis and the character study of Lex Luthor himself as a character. How is this Lex different from the Lex that we've seen before, and how does he approach this struggle that he has? Whether or not he should even attempt to bring his intellect and his memories back. Again, is the world better off without Lex Luthor? That's the question at the heart of the issue, and I wish we had spent a little bit more time in the issue itself actually discussing that. Now, for the actual full complaint, I'm going to save that for a little bit later into the spoiler section, but for now, let's get into the actual meat of this comic. Now, as I said, the one-shot issue serves a little bit as a character study for the Lex Luthor character. He, again, in the House of Brainiac event, he took it on himself to enact a plan that would result in him losing his memories and not even realizing that he is Lex Luthor. Complete and total amnesia. And prior to that, Lex Luthor was in prison, and he was at least purportedly attempting to become a better person, the man that Superman wants him to be, an incredible genius who will benefit all of humanity and will help humanity achieve its goals and dreams outside of purely Lex Luthor's goals and dreams and plans and all this. And after we see that, after that happens, like I said, Lex Luthor loses his memory. He is just a pure blank slate. At the end of the House of Brainiac event, Superman is talking to Lex, and he's saying things like, I didn't really believe you, but you proved me wrong here. And Lex is just like looking off to the side. He's like, huh? Were you talking to me? Who is Lex Luthor? And From that point on, we're dealing with, again, this character who has no memory of the things that he has done before. But throughout those issues, he is slowly learning. He is taking these quote-unquote history lessons with his daughter, Lena, and she is educating him on the man that he used to be. In this, Lex, again, a completely amnesiac Lex, hates the person that he used to be. There's a point where, they're playing some footage, and the Lex in the footage screams, "I'll kill you, Superman." And amnesiac Lex, we'll call him Alex for short. Although I know there's an Alex Luthor in the Death of Superman series who is, again, just a reincarnated Lex Luthor. But that's besides the point. Just to easily differentiate them, Lex will be bad and Alex will be good, okay? Just for, ease of conversation here. And Alex is like, that doesn't seem very healthy. And he begins to despise the person that he once was. He views himself as, this epitome of selfishness, right? He is constantly serving his own goals and serving his own ego in trying to take down Superman. And because he has that feeling towards his past self, he's sort of enjoying the fact that he can now be his own person and he can try to move forward from all this. And again, I wish we had seen a little bit more about that. But so as it pertains to the actual function of this comic book, again, Lex Luthor, they're trying to do things to attempt to get him to regain his memory, but they're not necessarily working. And the main function of this comic is that Mr. Terrific calls Superman up to the Justice League Watchtower, and he's saying, I've got a problem. Lex and I were working on this device that would allow us to contact the Elseworld, which is the Elseworld is the universe in which all of the Absolute books are located. It was created at the end of the DC All-In Special by Darkseid himself. Darkseid essentially died and sacrificed himself so that his energy could be used to form this entire world. And because it's made by Darkseid, it's an incredibly tumultuous place. There is, depravity. There are hardships. It is a much harder world than Earth Prime. And Lex and Terrific were trying to find a way to, contact that side, and then Lex loses his memory. And so Mr. Terrific has been, trying to do what he can by himself, but as he tells Superman, he's hit a bit of a brick wall. He can't access this information because it leads you down an intellectual dark path. And he tries to stay positive, in his own words. And the imprint panel for there is a close-up shot of his sleeve, which says "Fair Play," which I little aside, but I like that panel. I thought that was fun. I like Mr. Terrific a lot. I think he's a cool character. I'm excited to see him in the Superman movie moving forward. But in any case, so Superman is talking to Mr. Terrific, and he's like, "Okay, I understand why you called me here. You need Lex Luthor." And then the next page is this, I guess you might consider it of a montage of Lex throughout the years of him, finding the kryptonite and battling Superman and becoming the president of the United States, and then ending with an image of him in prison with his head in his hands. That was probably my favorite page of the whole comic. I really enjoyed the art style there, and I like the way that it chronicled the journey of this character. I thought it was very fun. And so Superman, having heard this from Mr. Terrific, goes and finds Lex. And he's like, "Hey, man, Mr. Terrific needs your help. You guys were working on a project together. I'm coming over here to see how your memory is coming along, how the recovery process, if you will, is moving forward." And Lex Luthor says, it's not going great. But then he asks, this question of Superman, or rather, Lex Luthor says something along the lines of, I was this this bad man. I was so terrible. Why are you coming to me? And Superman says, Lex, the old Lex, I said I was going to use Alex for the current Lex and that I'd stopped using that instantly. But the old Lex, Superman says that he was trying to become a better man. He was trying to right his wrongs and be a force for good in the world. And Amnesiac Lex jumps in and says, what if I'm that better man? What if I'm the better man? I don't have that baggage or whatever. I don't have this deep-seated ego, this hatred for you, for somebody who's doing good for society, And they continue the dialogue, and eventually Lex Luthor asks, is the world a better place with Lex Luthor in it? And Superman, he takes a pause and he thinks about it and he says, you're right, Lex. I shouldn't be forcing this on you. It's your choice to make. And then he just flies away. And we get this really incredible panel that it shows the emotion on Lex's face so well. He's in the foreground and Mercy Graves is in the background saying, Lex, it's okay, Superman, he didn't mean it, but it shows the emotion on Lex Luthor's face is just so well illustrated there. I love that. And so, again, this whole comic is about the questioning of Lex. And then this is where, again, the main function of function, probably not the right word. The main part of my complaint really starts to come into play here, because I wish we had a little bit more of Lex, wandering around the city with an internal monologue where he is questioning his place in the world, where he is rallying against or for the return of the old Lex. Him having this internal debate and struggle on whether or not it is good for him and good for humanity and good for Metropolis in general, to be more specific, for Lex to have his memory back and to be the old him. I wish we had seen a little bit more of that. I wish that we could have seen it, because it is an incredibly fast turnaround from the beginning of the comic where he's like, I'm not so really for this. I don't know if it's necessarily such a good idea. And then we get to the end and he quote unquote anonymously sends the blueprints and the plans and stuff to Mr. Terrific. I say quote unquote anonymously because it's not signed by Lex Luthor, but it is sent by Luthor Corp. But it's a fast turnaround from the beginning to the end when he sends the plans, and then at the very end where he is playing the music on the piano and Superman realizes, oh no, Lex Luthor remembers. It's incredibly fast. I wish that we could have seen, a little bit more. Maybe we could have seen internal monologue from both sides of this, right? From Lex Luthor being I don't know if this is the right thing to do. What if I'm the same? What if I get my memories back and I'm just the same evil man that I always was? The same evil man that I hate right now? What if I turn into that? And then we have the opposite side where it's Superman battling or having his own internal battle where he's like, okay, I believe that Lex Luthor can change. I think Lex Luthor was changing before this. Again, he sacrificed himself to save the world. He has the great potential to be good. But does that potential outweigh the possible negatives of him, reverting back to himself prior to the House of Brainiac storyline? I wish we could have seen that. It was just really fast and it felt kind of abrupt, and it felt like the comic ended and there should have been more going on. But I don't know. That's just my own personal opinion. And again, I'm open to the fact that is biased because I like the Lex Luthor character. So of course I want to see a couple more pages and panels of him sort of discussing this internal struggle. I'm aware that is in some part due to my biases, but at the same time, I think it would have just made the comic a better book in general. I don't know. Let me know down in the comments. Maybe you guys aren't as huge fans of Luthor as I am, and you thought that the comic did just fine. Or maybe, you're coming at it from a less biased point of view, and you think that my point is still valid. I don't know, but let me know down below. I do want to talk about one other thing that I really, really enjoyed here, and I mentioned it a little bit with the piano at the end, but I loved the use of music throughout this entire book. From the very opening pages, right, we established the fact that Lex Luthor, as a child, he played piano. He was musically minded, and so in an attempt to hopefully jog his memories a little bit, his daughter, Lena Luthor, brings him a piano. And she has a line in there where it's, music is very closely tied to memory. And I like that aspect for a couple different reasons. One, I'm a big fan of the importance of music, having been a choir boy and a band child. The music is very important to me, and I think that its importance is sort of lost in the mundanity, in the commercialization of music as we see it. But in any case, apart from that, it also serves as a little bit more of like a grounding feature, because again, this is something that is used in the real world. Like, people today are aware of the fact that, like, take for example, people with Alzheimer's. Playing music from their childhood or from their early life or from any point along in their life can help jog that memory and bring them to a more lucid state. And having that feature in this comic, again, like I said, I think it's a great grounding feature. It makes this, fantastical story about aliens and memory loss and reaching across the multiverse to a universe that's created solely from dark side energy, from evil incarnate. It grounds it all in this aspect of reality that is very, very true. And I really, really like that. One problem that I do have with this is we really only see Lex at the piano. In the present day, we only see him at the piano twice. In the beginning, where he can't play, he's struggling, he doesn't, it's a bunch of discordant notes or whatever. And then at the end, where he is playing this beautiful piece, and that piece is the thing that, makes Clark realize that, oh, Luthor remembers. Again, sort of with that, partially with the page, the minimal pages here, I wish that we could have seen a little bit more of like Lex, again, bringing this internal struggle towards the piano, but I don't know. I also liked the fact that they use this music piece to, again, in some ways it humanizes Luthor because we see him as a young child in this abusive household, but also it ties him to Clark in what I think is a pretty interesting way. As I mentioned at the outset, right, Luthor is one of my favorite villains because he is so oppositional to Superman. They are, diametrically opposed in the same way that like Batman and the Joker are. And so in the Luthor and Clark stories, I like when we can tie those two back to when they were younger. Like, this is a thing that these two are so deeply, deeply connected, and I really enjoy when they do that. And I think they did it in a fun way here. So Luthor, again, he's a musically minded child, and he's also incredibly intelligent. And so he creates this radio wave emitter. He grabs a radio wave emitter from downtown to complete this project, but it's basically like a music box, if you will, that sends signals out into space and can only be heard by certain people. And, he says, "I made it for you, Dad." And Lionel's like, what do you, this isn't normal. You're a weirdo freak. What the heck? Get out. Or no, he doesn't say get out. He says he can never leave the farm. And then Luthor runs away, and he hides at the top of a cliff, or a hill, rather. They're in the middle of Kansas. There's not that many cliffs. But he goes atop a hill, and he just starts tinkering with his music box, and the music starts to play. And then we cut to the Kent farm, the Kent household, and Clark is a baby, and he's screaming like a bat out of hell. He is, as babies are wont to do, and he just won't stop. And Ma and Pa, Martha and John, that's their real names. They're like, what do we do? And Pa's like, we got to take him somewhere. And Ma's like, we can't take him anywhere. They'll realize, he's an alien. We got to figure this out ourselves. And then the music from Lex Luthor's box drifts in through the window, and it's a beautiful melody, and it soothes Clark to sleep. And, Ma and Pa kind of like, oh, what'd you do? And it's like, I didn't do anything. And then one of them says, it's a miracle. And then that same tune is the tune that Clark hears at the end, where he's like, this sounds familiar, but I don't necessarily, like, why do I know this song? And then he realizes that it is Lex Luthor, and that's how he know that Luthor remembers. I think it's really, really interesting. And I think it's also fun because they tie in the music aspect into the problem with Mr. Terrific. When he sends the plans, or rather when Mr. Terrific gets the plans and he calls Superman, he's like, oh, thanks, man, and he describes the fact that the way that they are, the way that they solve this problem is that they found a way to send like sound vibrations across the multiverse into this Elseworld. It ties it all together in a really, really interesting way, I think. And so, I like I said, I enjoyed the comic. My main complaint is just the fact that I don't think we saw nearly enough of Luthor, of this internal struggle, of Clark's internal struggle. I really would have liked to have seen a little bit more. But I think the comic does a great job of setting up like the future of what's going to happen. What's going to happen with Lex, with Clark, in this upcoming summer of Superman. It builds up this, feeling of anticipation. Like, what Lex are we going to get? Is this going to be like an old Lex before he was put in prison, where he is, purely diabolical and egomaniacal and wants to destroy Superman and all that he stands for? Is it going to be Lex prior to the House of Brainiac event, when he's in jail and he's trying to become a better man? Or is it going to be something different? Is it going to be this sort of amalgamation of all of them, right? Does he have all of his memories of the past and the memories of, his amnesiac life? And is he going to use all of these things together in conjunction to be the better man, but to be the best that he can be? Is this the beginning of a Lex Luthor story, or a Lex Luthor hero arc? And then obviously the question with that is like, if he is good, when is he going to turn bad? Because always, if a villain becomes a good guy, it is like an ironclad law of comic books that he will at some point again revert to being a villain. How is that going to happen? What are the events, if he is this reformed man? What is the thing that's going to change that causes him to revert back to old Lex Luthor? I'm really, really excited to see what happens. And I'm excited to see see this tie into like the previous Superman one-shot special, which was the Superwoman special. In that, the way that Lois gets her powers is she's wearing this suit that Lex Luthor designed, and it is reaching out into space, and it steals powers from General Zod and gives them to Lois. And we have a panel where Mercy says something along the lines of, she can't know what Lex Luthor designed the suit for, or something along those lines. When are we going to learn that? When are we going to learn that? And what is that purpose? Presumably, if it's reaching out into space, reaching out into space and had contact with Zod, was there like a level of cooperation there? Or was he attempting to work against Zod in some capacity? It obviously not probably not a benevolent capacity, working towards his own evil goals, but what was the goal? I don't know. I'm very, very excited for that. I also hope that, after the events of this comic, we get to see the return of LexCorp. I mentioned before in the Superwoman special that I'm not necessarily a huge fan of Supercorp. I think it's a decent idea. I think it's interesting. Are we going to learn throughout this, now that Lex has his memories back, are we going to learn that Lex gifting LexCorp to Superman and renaming it Supercorp, is this some long play? Is this some long con? Was he never really a better man? Was he really just trying to, trick Superman into, further achieving his goals? I don't know. I hope that's not necessarily the case. I wouldn't be opposed to Supercorp returning to LexCorp because, again, I'm not a huge fan of Supercorp in general. But I hope it's not as simple as, it was always a long con and it was, Lex Luthor was never really good. I think if you make it so that Lex Luthor was never good and he was always evil and he was always trying to serve these dastardly ends, then I think it sort of detracts from the character that we've seen. I mean, it's obviously more keeping in tune with the Lex Luthor character as it's been traditionally. But I think if you take that aspect away from him, one of the problems is that you take away all of the development that we've seen since House of Brainiac up until now. So I'm a little bit worried about that. But like I said, I'm incredibly, incredibly excited. Let's see. I believe Lex Luthor's story is not going to continue until Superman 24, I believe, is what they say in the at the end of the Lex Luthor special. And let's see, Superman 24 is not going to be released until March, so that's a ways away. And then the next issue that we'll see is issue number 23, releasing February 26th. That is a weird thing to me, and I thought about that while I was reading, or while I had finished this, is, why would you why would you release the one-shot special, an entire month and a half? Well, I guess it would have been almost exactly a month because it was January 29th that this was released. But why would you release it a whole month away, especially when presumably Superman 23 is going to follow a little bit more, is going to rely a little bit more on Lois Lane and her dealings with the Time Trapper, which is what's going on in the current run. I don't know why you wouldn't delay the Lex Luthor special like 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks or whatever, until after, well, I guess it would have been a month, until after Superman number 23 comes out. So then we have the Lex Luthor special, which leads directly into the next issue of Superman. But now it's like, we get the Lex Luthor special, and then we wait a month, and we get Superman 23, which is presumably happens before the Lex Luthor special, and is going to have a story that's not necessarily really related. And then we have to wait a whole nother month for Superman 24. It's a little thing, and maybe not necessarily, a massive thing to discuss, but it's just a little bit weird to me to release this special and then be like, all right, we'll see you in 2 months. I don't know. That's, obviously not a huge thing. It's just a release schedule thing, but it did seem weird to me. But to wrap things up, like I said, I think this comic was really, really fun, and I would definitely recommend picking it up, though, like I said, we're not going to see the effects of it for at least 2 months, but whatever. What are you going to do? In any case, I definitely think it's worth the read. I think it's definitely worth it. So pick it up at your local comic shop, and let's see. I'm going to be back here next Tuesday to review Rebel Ridge, which is a film starring Aaron Pierre. And this is I'm watching this movie because Aaron Pierre is going to play Jon Stewart in the upcoming Lantern series, which I am very, very excited for. One of these days, I'm probably going to do a video where I can just talk for, an inordinate amount of time over how excited I am for the series and my possible theories as to what's going to happen. So that's next Tuesday. And then the Thursday after that, I'm going to be taking a look at the Aquaman series, which just started in DC, in the newest DC All-In initiative, written by Jeremy Adams. So there's another Green Lantern connection, because Jeremy Adams is writing the mainline Green Lantern series as well. Now, you're going to have to stick tuned for those. Make sure that you comment down below. Tell me what you thought about this comic and what you think Lex Luthor is going to be up to in 2 months' time. Let me know. Let me know. And then make sure that you like and subscribe so that you never miss another episode. And we will see you guys next time.